thank you everybody for coming. To save my embarrassment, I think you should all introduce yourselves. We're going to skip Jade and go straight to Holly.
Okay, well, I'll just give a really, really short introduction. My name's Holly. You can hear I'm Australian. It's not a particularly diverse thing to be in London, but here we are. I work for a company called QA Works. We're a technical testing consultancy, and we've spent the last couple of months sort of in discussions with makers about how we can work together to get, well, a whole range of grads into our business. That'll work, right? There you go.
Hi, I'm Laura. I work at a company called MoveBubble at the moment, but I learnt to code through Makers Academy last year. I was in the August 2016 cohort, and I finished in November. Yeah, and MoveBubble were a hiring partner with Makers, and so that's kind of how I got into it. I'll wrap up there.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a head of talent for a renewable energy company called Bulb, based just around the corner from here.
Hi everyone, I'm Jules Coleman. I'm the founder and CTO of BuildPath. Formerly, I founded Hassle.com, and in doing so, I taught myself to code from a book because makers didn't exist at the time. Yeah, that's me. Okay.
Question. Right, so what we're going to do, I'm going to ask each person sort of one or two questions and then open it up to you. For the sake of having to hand a microphone around, you ask the question, I'll repeat it. That sounds the easiest. Let's go with Jules. Ready for question one? Yeah. How do we ensure that everyone feels welcome both to apply for and then stay in a role?
So we've, at our new company, BuildPath, I've just actually started hiring. So I've recently made 2 hires for junior developers. They actually start on Monday. So about to expand the team, treble the team from 1 to 3. And I've done a lot of work in this. And it's actually how I got in touch with Emily and Makers on working on our job description, trying to make it more inclusive. I'd written it, I'd posted it. I was bemoaning on Twitter the fact that I had no female applicants. I have quite an androgynous name and a blurry photo on Twitter. I don't think people thought that I was a woman. And so people started going, well, no woman would ever apply for a job description like this because frankly it's awful. And I was like, oh, right, okay, well, I wrote it. But there was some really good feedback in amongst some of the Twitter angst. And actually working on the job description really did help. It didn't massively boost the number of female applicants, if I'm being honest. But I think still the people that we've ended up hiring are diverse in their own way. Or inclusive, or I'm not sure grammatically how to say it at all. And that was important, and even just in the exercise of thinking about it and kind of making myself think about that. In terms of how will we make them feel welcome in the team, and how we've made others feel welcome in the team that have joined before them, I think that is really important, and not just from an inclusivity kind of point of view, but it's really, it's hard to join somewhere new, especially when a team's already formed, and there's like in-jokes, and there's cliques and of all forms, you've got to really think about it. So it's something that, like now I'm already preparing for next Monday. So like from the simple things of like their desk with their computer and everything we already set up for them and kind of ready and waiting, to thinking about how we'll structure that first week and get them doing something useful and shipping some code so they can feel like they're already being productive and part of the team. And then just broadly, like, on a longer term, how we're going to develop them and mentor them and kind of give them a career arc. And technical training. And I think if you focus on that stuff, which is not necessarily inclusivity focused, but just a good experience for people, and like at the core, we're all people. That's kind of the thing that binds us all together. You tend to get to a better place. So.
Thank you very much, making people feel welcome. Michael, I have a question I have been given here. I didn't write this one. I'm sorry. How have you gone about increasing applications from underrepresented groups?
Hi, everyone. So Bulb is maybe different from a few of the companies that are represented here in that we are a tech-led business, but we're not an out-and-out tech business. So the tech team is a relatively small percentage of our team, but we do have particularly an ongoing problem with the gender diversity of our business, partly because we're a tech-led business, partly because we're an energy business, which are historically not particularly diverse, and also we hire a lot of STEM graduates, which I think the latest statistics from women in engineering was that less than maybe 15 or 16% of women enrolled in STEM degrees across the country are, less than 15% are female. So what we've done is we've done a huge amount of work to increase the diversity of the pipeline of people that we hire first thing we did was we hired Caroline, who's here. And Caroline spends a lot of time headhunting female candidates for some of our key jobs, particularly those where we have maybe making 1 or 2 hires. That's significantly increased the pipeline of female candidates into those roles. On our main role that we hire, which is a kind of operations customer support role, that doesn't have an influence. Since I started last October, we've processed over 1,200 candidates, I think phone interviewed nearly 600, and hired about 50. So adding a few people through headhunting activities isn't going to make that much difference. So we've done a lot of the stuff that Jade and Will have already talked about. We've changed our advertising significantly. We're no longer killing things and smashing things quite as much as we used to, or like challenging things. Some of the language in our ads when I started was like spectacularly male. But that's been really helpful. I think we've increased the base percentage of women applying to our ops jobs from low 20s to pushing 30%, which might not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about 1,200 candidates, it is quite a lot. And we've increased the gender diversity of the business. From when I joined, there was two female people in the business to now 40% of a team of about 70. So it feels like we've been quite successful. Does that answer that question? I feel like I was quite a long answer.
Yeah, it sounds like you're a sort of recruiting ninja guru wizard. Laura, I'm very excited to hear your answer to this, because you've just gone through a process of looking for a job, and you were actively wanting to find inclusive companies. How did you go about looking for them, and how did you know when you'd found them?
I think at the moment diversity is kind of a bit of a buzzword, and so a lot of people will say, "Oh yeah, sure, we're trying to hire more diversely," but it's like, okay, do you have a plan? Do you understand why? Like, what are you trying to achieve from it? And those kind of things you can really drill down. Like, you can find the answer to that quite quickly. It's like, oh, okay, why do you think it's important? Because it looks good for the company. Like, that's just not something I'm really interested in. It's not really getting to the core of the issue. And so kind of going through the interview process, what you can ask are things like, you know, how do you solve conflict in your team? Because diverse teams will naturally have conflict, and great teams will find ways of solving those problems and like getting to the bottom of those and like coming up with really creative solutions. So that's kind of what I look for. It's kind of, I think it's really important for teams to be diverse, so then you get the best solutions and like you are coming up with like great ideas together, and like kind of ways that I went about kind of identifying that with questions like, how do you solve conflicts, and like how do you work together, and kind of things to that extent. And like, is diversity important to you? Why? And yeah, that was kind of how I found Move Bubble, and one of the reasons why I wanted to work for them.
Thank you very much. There's a couple of observations I have here. So one was this idea of reaching out to people, going and sourcing, inviting them, you know, making people feel welcome by inviting them, rather than this sort of, I mean, I'm sure you've heard the statistics, you know, variously reported somewhere between 10 and 20% of jobs are ever advertised. All of these other jobs are filled where no one ever put a job description up on a job board anywhere. And that's actually a small part of the way that people recruit, is this idea of broadcasting. There's a whole ream of other stuff which is just talking to people and going and having those conversations and reaching out and inviting them in. And then what I hear from Laura is the idea of this, a judgment of how good you are as an inclusive employer is, how do you work presently in such a way that is the ideal way of working if you had a diverse team? Are you already working in a way that supports a diverse team, or do you still have work to do to get there? I have a question for you, Holly, but I need to check my notes. I don't know, I think it might well just be a repeat of some of the stuff that we've said before, but what are you doing to increase the diversity of your team?
So I don't think anyone's cracked this necessarily. I think anyone who says they've cracked it has probably having you on. You know, we've got a long, long way to go. What we're really trying to work on is the internal culture. It's all well and good to have a recruitment process that says we're diverse, but if they step in the door and we're not, and that we're not inclusive, and that we're not walking the talk, that's not great. So we've looked at all kinds of things. You know, our team would go out for Friday night drinks. Everyone stays on afterwards. They go to the pub. They talk about a bit of work. They talk about, you know, what's been going on, who's getting the next promotion, who's going to what site. That's not necessarily a very inclusive environment. There's people that don't drink for a variety of reasons. Inherently, they're going to be people from different social backgrounds and women. Someone who's pregnant, probably not going to go down to the pub and have a drink. Those people are missing out on those opportunities. So we've had a look at that and said, okay, well, that's fine. You can still go to the pub. We're not going to stop you. We don't want to remove that opportunity. But we also want to try and create other opportunities. So can we go out and, you know, go to Go Ape? Can we go go-karting? Can we go to a museum? I don't know. Can we do something else that's just a little bit less focused on one particular part of you know, let's face it, quite a masculine culture, and make sure that everyone's got those opportunities to have that networking and those sort of things. So it's little interventions in our, you know, challenging ourselves and asking those questions about, you know, who is going to be excluded by this behaviour. Realistically, we're very much at that step. I think we need to deal with diversity in the business before we go and, you know, sell it and say we've cracked this. We are the perfect business for a woman to come and work at, or anyone else from any other background.
Thank you very much. Jade, you alluded slightly during your presentation to your interview process. How do we combat bias in the interview process?
I don't know, we're still learning. But no, I think a lot of the process is about kind of who you are. So a lot of our questions is tell us about you. We're actually going through change at the moment globally, where we've just scrapped our process and starting again. And people at ThoughtWorks are going, no, I went through that process. Why is no one else doing it? And the new process that we're building, again, is quite similar in terms of, like, tell us about you, who are you? But everybody now is going through some training at ThoughtWorks.
So if I could summarize correctly, that's what are the kind of the crossovers between different kinds of underrepresented group rather than just gender?
Well, how these organisations are looking at those interconnected things,
yeah.
But also looking at accessibility or racism.
Sure. We take a second question as well, so. So that's how do we address the mistakes that people are making without them feeling kind of put upon? Should we just run through? Do you want to take a little bit of that?
Cool. The first question, again, I think I said it on my presentation. We are kind of still learning and still wondering how. And trying to find ways we can do this. One thing personally that I've been doing is working with universities that have societies and partnering with those societies. So is it the Caribbean Society? Is it the African Girls in Tech Society? And trying to partner with all these groups to go, okay, let's do it individually and let's do it like this. But again, we're still learning and we're still kind of like, how do we go about it? In terms of disabilities, we've just hired this year our first deaf project manager, and again he's incredible, Matthew. And we said, what do you need? What do you need from us, and how do we create an environment for you to work? So again, it's just seeing these people for the potential and what they can bring to ThoughtWorks, and going, okay, how do we change to accommodate you? So yeah, we're still, again, scratching the surface. Sorry, I haven't got more answers for that. In terms of the other question, we have this huge feedback culture at ThoughtWorks. Dan used to work at ThoughtWorks, so he'll know about this. And sometimes when you join, like I said, it's a little bit like, just let me have an opinion. Like, what's wrong with you people? But we've got this huge feedback culture where it just becomes natural to say, to be able to say, can I have a quick word with you? How we would go about it again is people calling other people out. It's just always about respect. We always say, as long as you're being respectful, say whatever you want to say whatever you're feeling. Every team, so our talent team, for example, we have feedback every week, where we would spend 30 minutes, and we never ever miss it out, because it's so important to kind of go, hey, so this week, when you made that comment around X, Y, Z, I felt, and talk about how it made you feel, rather than what you think they should have, why you think it was wrong. So we always say, tell them how you feel, do it respectfully, and make sure you never miss out on giving feedback.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
You sure?
I was going to answer the first question about other sorts of diversity, because I appreciate that my first answer was very focused towards gender diversity, which is a challenge for us, but by no means the only one we think about. We do lots of things to try and increase the diversity of the team outside of just the ratio of men to women. We have 100% graduates in our organisation. We are a little bit picky, if I'm honest, about the kind of graduates that we get. So if you look at our graduate team, there's a lot of people from the top 4 or 5 universities, none of which are hugely ethnically diverse, with the exception of Imperial. And we do target Imperial for that reason, because it has a slightly different mix than Oxford and Cambridge and the others. I think also we've set up an internal team, which is cross-functional, which is a diversity team, which is separate to the talent function. And we regularly brainstorm about initiatives about how we can increase diversity. We also have a lot of work on the accessibility of the sort of organisation and the policy. We need to do more work on the policy stuff, but that will help attract people from, with disabilities or from other backgrounds. But yeah, it's an ongoing challenge for sure.
I think it's a tricky one, right? And Jade covered a little bit in the talk in that, and actually I think the two questions have a slight interconnectedness themselves, in that, Will, at the outset, you said, oh, I'm kind of nervous about speaking about today. And it's like there's a general apprehension about talking about anything in this space for fear you might say the wrong thing, even well-intentioned. And I think that's something that you need to be careful of in an organization too, is that you absolutely want everyone to be respectful to each other, but everyone toeing around on eggshells, afraid of hurting anybody else's feeling is no better of a place to work either. And that also extends to the hiring process. We've thankfully, and maybe, by chance or by luck, managed to have a relatively diverse bunch of people come together in our hiring process. The way we've our hiring process is much like Jade, you say, kind of tell us about yourself. For the technical stuff, we've ditched technical whiteboard interviews. They're completely useless in my mind. I Google for things and look from Stack Overflow when things I can't work out how it works. I don't need to write on a whiteboard an algorithm. And that extends to other kind of roles that we're hiring for. And when you do that, and when you try and just get to know the person at a general level, and will they be, a good fit for the organization because they're really keen and hungry to learn, and they're curious, and they want to do a good job. Not so our accountant, our part-time accountant who we're training, is also a part-time go-go dancer. It's this strange mix, but it works for our organization. And we've managed to kind of get that diversity. And I think if we had gone for the more traditional sort of recruitment process, those people may have been excluded. But I think, we'd definitely be remiss to say that we have it all covered. And it's also because you don't know what you can ask or what is appropriate or what's not appropriate. And especially in smaller organizations, I think that can be a real blocker to things. You just don't know you know, if you're about to step into a minefield when you're going into something, even if your intentions are good.
Okay, so I'm not going to add too much to that, but I guess to answer the second question around you know, calling things out in a respectful way, I think, you know, being respectful is important, but I think being respectful doesn't mean you can't be confrontational. I think sometimes you need to be. I don't think you need to call someone out in front of a group. I don't think you need to humiliate or belittle somebody, but pulling them into a side room and just quite bluntly stating that was inappropriate. Why did you make that comment? How do you think it made the other person feel? Like you said, I think facing it head on can in some cases be the most effective. So I wouldn't rule that out and fear offending someone who has offended somebody else. You know, I think you just have to grab it by the horns. As far as being, as far as our inclusivity of other groups other than women. So I do a bit of work with a charity called Diversity Role Models, and I'm getting a nod, you've come across them. So they do work in schools, and essentially they're out to combat homophobic, biphobic and transphobic bullying in schools. And the way that they do that is by looking at language and the use of language and the inadvertent and innocent use of language. So, you know, kids saying, oh, you're so gay, and they don't mean it, they don't really even particularly mean any offense by it. But to someone who and perhaps even the other side of that conversation isn't bothered by it. But it's the person who overhears that, and it's the person who, you know, is offended by that or doesn't even know that they are, but it's creating this hostile environment through language. And I think the principles that we teach these young children can be extended into the workplace. It's about looking at, you know, when someone does use a slur or even something that's just a little bit off colour, you know, talking to them, educating them about why that creates a hostile environment or a less inclusive and diverse environment. And that can apply to, you know, LGBT issues, but disability, race, anything at all. I think communicating and explaining and working with someone to help them understand why that's a problem is important.
Thank you very much, everyone. From personal experience, I can say, having been called out, even when it's done in a very respectful way, it's still incredibly painful. Because of the cognitive dissonance of realizing that who you think you are is very different from who you are presenting to the world. We also train at Makers Academy in a method called nonviolent communication. I think it's really badly named because it implies that naturally your communication is quite violent. It's probably better named needs-based communication, and talking a little bit about, it's very similar to what Jade was talking about, the idea that you observe something rather than judge something. So you talk about facts, things that have actually happened, rather than generalizing, oh, you always say this. You know, when you said that, it made me feel this. And it goes further than that through the emotions into needs to say, you made me feel this because my need for collaboration was not being met. And then leads into making a request. And the whole point of the request is that you say, would you be willing to X, where it is acceptable that their answer is no. It's not an instruction. Veiled as a request. It's a request that they, so that potentially is a method that you could research to cover that.
I mean, to me, I think as Will sort of alluded to earlier, it's not about making a point of hiring that person because of a particular trait or diverseness that they exhibit. It's about making your hiring process more inclusive across the board. It's not about those individual choices between one person or the other. If you have a candidate who is a white man and they are genuinely the best candidate for the job, great. But if you have 20 of those candidates in a row and they're all in a row and they are all the best candidate for the job, why? And it doesn't directly answer the question, but you know, I think it's dangerous to hire someone just because they're going to add to your diversity.
And I think I don't believe in quotas, but I do believe a lot in data from the recruitment process. And if you're a very small business with a handful of people, if you have all the stuff in place that Will talked about and Jade's talked about, then you can make entirely meritocratic decisions, and over time your business will become a diverse business because you believe in it. It's an ongoing initiative. Diversity is not like a temporary thing that you do for 6 months. It's something that you talk about in your business all the time. We talk about as a team, we talk about as a diversity team, we talk about at a management level. And over time, you will end up with a much more diverse and inclusive business than you start off with. But on an individual hire basis, it's quite difficult to be anything other than meritocratic. It is okay to take positive action. If you really have two candidates that are absolutely equal, then you can make a choice based on diversity. Diverse teams outperform those that aren't undiverse. It's like a well-known fact. But I think in the situation where you have you know who you want to hire, then you should hire that person and make sure that all the stuff that's happening before and after that, in terms of the recruitment process and what happens when people join, are right. Then you won't have a problem in the long term as you grow.
On a legal note, there is a difference between positive action and positive discrimination. If you are hiring somebody who is not better than another person for a reason that has to do with a discriminating category, then that's illegal. So discrimination defined by the EU is differential treatment based on unjustified reasons, such as race, age, gender. So if you are choosing somebody for that reason, then that is illegal. And it's interesting you talk about meritocracy. Meritocracy is also actually an exclusive way because of the natural bias towards disadvantaged people not to perform as well. But then, and this is maybe something to take away, because we're going to stop now and mill around and talk, and you can ask people questions directly to their face. Something to take away is the fact that recruitment is ultimately an exclusive process. Doesn't matter how you change it, you are still going to have to say no to people. You are still going to have to exclude people because you're going from a more than one number of people down to a one number of people. And in that process, you are excluding people. So we can try as hard as we can, but naturally, generally, the process of recruitment is exclusive. So how can we make it as inclusive as possible or as not exclusive as possible is the question for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and joining us this morning. Please hang around for a bit, talk to our panelists, ask some questions, and obviously if anyone wants to know anything about Makers Academy, there are people with blue and red badges who would be very willing to talk to you. Thank you very much.